Now on the town hall, an announcement few saw coming today, the governor's resignation that will take effect in 2 weeks. Good evening, everybody. I'm Kate Welshofer.
And I'm Michael Wooten. We have one bit of breaking news to all the breaking news we've been covering. We just learned moments ago that Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, who of course will be taking over in a couple of weeks, will have a media availability tomorrow afternoon in Albany. I'll be there covering that tomorrow.
We have a lot to get to this half hour, and you can see the many angles that we've got coverage.
Yeah, in a moment, we're going to have some new reporting and insight into why the governor decided to do this today and new questions about his future, both legally and politically.
So to get everyone up to date here, this day started with a news conference from the governor's attorney criticizing the attorney general's report that came out a week ago now, looking into allegations of sexual harassment and assault. Well, just minutes later, the governor himself addressed the state.
He also started with complaints about that investigation, calling it political and biased, and claimed that it left out key facts. But then there was this dramatic shift in tone, followed by this.
The best way I can help now is if I step aside and let government get back to governing. And therefore, that's what I'll do, because I work for you. And doing the right thing is doing the right thing for you.
So that leaves Western New York's Kathy Hochul 14 days away from becoming the first woman ever to serve as governor of New York State.
That we know, but there are a lot of unanswered questions about how that process will work and what comes next here. Channel 2's Ron Plants did some investigating.
The line of succession clear as per the state constitution, so within 14 days, Governor Hochul. But in that transition period of 2 weeks, a UB political science professor weighing in on what may be taking place in the governor's office, also known as the executive chambers.
I hope over the next 2 weeks that things are being packaged in such a way that the handoff is neat, as it should be. But there are some lingering worries that I have about who's staying, who's going, and what does that transition look like?
The professor says it may not be that easy with certain considerations in Albany.
As an observer, as an outside observer, it would appear that they're in place in order to keep government running. I wouldn't have any worries along that dimension. Where I would have worries, if there are worries to be had, it's in terms of who's immediately surrounding the governor. We saw, of course, the high-profile resignation of Melissa DeRosa, someone who was the governor's secretary. It's safe to say that she was really running quite a bit of the show internally there. And without her in place, and presumably without some others like her in place, the day-to-day operations, I'm not sure what that's going to look like.
Nihaizo expects COVID to be Hochul's ongoing first major challenge as the brand new state chief executive. While there are no current executive orders, and there is hope the situation would not get worse in the Empire State to require anything like that, she has to be prepared.
The lessons of the pandemic have been, you need someone who can respond quickly, who responds quickly. That's an executive. And so the legislature has been all too happy to push a lot in terms of emergency powers onto the office of the governor. And so I think she's going to need to be ready immediately in order to pick up that mantle, because the legislature by its nature moves slowly.
And Ron is joining us now. And Ron, for so long, this was a what if. Now that it's certain, who might the lieutenant governor look to for advice as she prepares now to take over?
That's an interesting question. While again, some of Cuomo's aides may assist, but some may leave, as Dr. Nihaizo was referring to there. He expects that Hochul, as a product of Western New York, may depend on some politicians in this area because, let's face it, she knows them. She has a trust factor here, which she may not have with all downstate officials, especially with an election year set for 2022 if she decides to run now as an incumbent. But on the other hand, during her time as lieutenant governor, she's been building up those connections with downstate leaders. She is very personable as a campaigner, as we have seen here, so that may help her as the state's first female governor, especially after a sexual harassment scandal.
Yeah, and Ron, this is not the first time we've gone through something like this. We've had sort of these difficult transitions in the past and the not so distant past.
Yeah, okay, let's do a quick little history lesson here. Eliot Spitzer, remember him, resigned as governor back in March 2008 after the client number 9 scandal with his admitted liaison with a prostitute, which federal agents uncovered. That put Lieutenant Governor David Paterson in as the state's first African-American governor, and interestingly, the country's first legally blind governor. But Paterson, who is described by some as the accidental governor, had his own issues. Even as a former state senator, he did not have the support in Albany, and there were scandals surrounding him as well. He is not regarded by political scientists to be an effective governor and did not run for his own term when it was clear he did not have the backing to do so. Michael and Kate? And by the way, interesting, I wanted to point this out. We had some video where we see the younger state attorney general, Andrew Cuomo, in the Capitol at Paterson's inauguration back in March 2008, seated near former and disgraced Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver that day before state lawmakers. Very interesting.
Certainly a lot of interesting chapters in Albany, to be sure.
Yes.
Ron Plant's reporting live for us. Ron, thank you.
So for months now, this story has put a national focus on New York State politics and in the worst light possible, pretty much.
Yeah, right. Once again, and that focus got even sharper today with the resignation. So what does it mean politically now going forward? And what about the national spotlight turning to Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul?
A short time ago, I spoke about all of that with Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd. It was just a few months ago that you and I were talking on this show as the investigations were heating up into the governor. You said it was the beginning of the end, and here we are today with this announcement. What do you make of it, and what do you think brought the governor to this conclusion?
Well, look, I will say this. The only thing surprising about it is that he came to this conclusion, I think, quicker than folks around him thought he would. I had spoken to someone late last week who said they thought they had eventually get him to resignation, but they thought he was going to fight the impeachment process longer, that he was going to exhaust every avenue that he found that was possible, maybe delaying the start, just buying more time. I do think two things happened this weekend that we shouldn't discount as having some influence on the timing of this decision. Number one, Melissa DeRosa resigning, his longtime chief of staff, the fact that she, it was the statement she put out, never once mentioning the governor, making it pretty clear she couldn't defend him, and she wasn't going to defend him. And then he did put his attorney out on television to try to defend him a couple of times, including even today to folks. And let's just be honest, it didn't go well. And the question is that the fault of the attorney, or is that the fault of the facts? His defense felt like a defense, a 20th century defense in a 21st century world. So I think that seemed to expedite things. And honestly, I'd put a third thing. I think even he was surprised at how little support he had left in what I would call the New York Democratic Party.
You've covered a lot of these scandals all over the country. Is this the end of the political career of Andrew Cuomo?
It's likely that Andrew Cuomo, that we've known that political trajectory, that political career is done. But the idea that he's never going to serve in office again, I don't buy that. I think it's very possible. And in fact, I know it's more and more gambling's legal now around the country. If you told me I could buy a ticket that said, that would pay off if he runs for office someday again before the end of this decade, I'd buy that ticket. And I think, because I believe that the single biggest motivator for him to avoid the impeachment process was to avoid that ultimate punishment. Think about Andrew Cuomo's life. His entire life has been in elective politics. His entire adult life. He started working on his dad's campaign at 16. He doesn't know what else to do for a living other than to work in and around politics. So not having the ability to run for dog catcher, let alone governor or comptroller or mayor, I'm telling you, I think it's more likely than not that he will someday look for a reason to run for office. He's going to be sitting on $18 million, and I imagine he's not going to spend it anytime soon.
There is a bright spotlight on governors all over the country right now as they navigate so many different things. Top of mind still the pandemic that continues on, worse in some places than others. We have a lieutenant governor from right here in Western New York who is going to be governor in 2 weeks' time. What do you think she is doing now to prepare for something like that?
Look, the biggest thing is being prepared to know what you're in charge of. being governor of New York is a very powerful position. Not all governorships have the type of power that the New York governorship has. She has a real opportunity here. This is a big moment for non-New York City Democrats. Having a Western New York Democrat is probably good for party balance. You know, as the party sort of looks like it's becoming more and more captive of progressives in New York City. How she handles this first 3 months is not only a real opportunity for her future, but for the future of the New York Democratic Party in 2022.
It's always great to get your insight. Chuck Todd is moderator of Meet the Press. Thanks so much for your time.
You got it. Appreciate it.
And Chuck will be part of NBC's coverage on nightly news coming up at 6:30. You won't want to miss that.